Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our session. This session is run by the Committee on the Development of Early Career Educational Psychologists. My name is DeLeon Gray, and our co-chair for this committee is Christine Bay. And this session is about hitting the ground running with classroom-based research. The reason why we chose to put this session together is because partnering with schools has so many different components to it. It can be very complex. As we know, schools are complex places. They can be messy places, but they're also places that bring a lot of fulfillment and joy to researchers when we're able to really see our work in action and make real connections with students and improve the social conditions that students are in. And so we have connected with a number of scholars who work in schools currently, who have worked in schools or who partner with schools and school districts. And so they will guide us through a number of considerations that can help us support schools better, especially in the time that we're in these days. So I'm gonna ask each speaker to introduce themselves briefly, but also to lift the name of someone or something that they are grateful for or who makes them laugh or brings them joy. So let's start off with Karen.
Thank you, DeLeon. I'm so excited about this panel. I'm the Mary Emily Warner Professor of Education at Arizona State University. I've been doing school-based research since I was a doctoral student, and it is definitely the passion of my life to work on improving writing instruction as part of equity, social justice, achievement, and reading for writing. I'm going to break the rule, DeLeon. There are two things that make me happy and make me smile.
Break the rule.
Break the rules. My family is definitely number one. Steve is an unending source of teasing and laughter. My daughter is a pure joy. And then there's my horse. Those three things keep me healthy and sane.
Hi, my name's Alexandra, and I'm a doctoral student at Michigan State University, and I'm new to being on the research side of school-based partnerships. Before I came to graduate school, I was a teacher, and I've been a teacher in lots of different places. I taught in Denver, Colorado, the Mississippi Delta, Singapore, Thailand. And so I'm coming to this work having had a lot of classroom experience, but not necessarily a lot of classroom experience on the research side of things. And I wanted to shout out my husband, who still is teaching middle school. He teaches 7th and 8th grade, and he brings me lots of joy. And he also has really been a good source of keeping me grounded, as now I'm in the ivory tower. And so he's always pushing me on, like, how is this going to help students? How is this going to help teachers? And so I think that's important questions for us always to keep in mind.
Hi, everybody. I'm Doug Lombardi, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Maryland. And I used to be a classroom teacher, K-12 mainly, mostly science, and but other things too. And just really glad to be a part of this panel. And one thing that brings me joy, I'll just say something that makes me laugh out. I like to laugh out loud in theaters, movie theaters, or when I'm seeing a play, and I like it when I can just really laugh, just a chuckle laugh. That really brings a lot of joy.
Hey everybody, my name is Gwen Marchand, and hopefully you can hear me okay. It looks like I just froze. I am an associate professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and also since February, an associate dean for research, where one of my roles is to help build partnerships. So I'm extremely excited about learning from everyone on this panel today as well. But let's see, I'm a little different. I actually worked for a school district as a research coordinator for a little while before I entered the academy. And so I think it's an interesting place to be, not as a classroom teacher, but let's see, what brings me joy would be definitely my two kids. They're 8 and 10, and they're hilarious. And they are also what puts me in the position of also thinking about classroom-based research as a parent. So there's a whole lot of layers that go on, and they're really funny. And I've just spent a couple weeks with them, a really concentrated time, which is a joy. So.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Corey Neugebauer. I'm the Dean of Students and a Social Science Instructor at Metro Early College High School on the campus of The Ohio State University. Metro was started about 16 years ago as a collaboration between Ohio State and Battelle Memorial Institute. So a big part of my job, in addition to being a classroom teacher, and doing a lot of just typical admin work, is I get to be the liaison between Ohio State and Metro and help develop a lot of programming, which is really great. I was born on campus in '76 and grew up in Columbus. Then I was a terrapin for 4 years. So I'm a proud turtle, and spent 6 years in the U.S. Foreign Service before deciding I wanted to be an educator. So happy to be here. Joy, my daughter Kennedy, she's a real trip. A couple days ago, she dropped a Moana quote that just busted me up. So I mean, 4 years old, and she's already she's got such great comedic timing. She's awesome. So thanks for the invitation to be here.
Thank you. And as I turn it over to Christine, I just want to say the reason why the question about joy is so important is because the type of energy that we bring in schools and that we give to communities is very important. And universities can put pressures on us sometimes and make us feel that these university imposed deadlines are the main thing. However, when we partner with schools, it's important not to impose that type of energy on them, but to give off an energy of being not only thoughtful and helpful, but also something that attracts people to want to continue to connect and partner with you. So thank you for sharing. And I am going to pass it off to Christine.
Thanks so much, DeLeon, and thank you to all the panelists for introducing yourselves and sharing a little bit about what brings you joy. And so without any further ado, we will move on to the questions. These were collated by the committee members with advice from our colleagues on our networks. And so we will go through each of these one by one, and the panelists have already volunteered to speak on some of these. But I just wanted to remind folks who are listening in to please use the chat box feature to ask any follow-up questions or share any ideas or thoughts. And DeLeon and I will be moderating the chat and bringing those up to the panelists as well. So I'll keep these questions up for a couple minutes, but we'll start with the first. What advice do you have for early career scholars who are interested in engaging in university K-12 partnerships? So for example, lessons learned or key considerations.
Do you just want us to jump in, Christine?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. I'll go. I think I've really learned a lot of very difficult lessons around engaging with partnerships. They're not always easy. So I think it's important to be very patient, to be very flexible, and to some extent, and to always treat any K-12 school-based research that you engage with as a partnership. I think sometimes people have this expectation that they're going to swoop in, do some research, and then take that data away and write a publication. And that's not a partnership. And I think if you want to have a long-term relationship with schools or school district or specific educators, then it like any other relationship, it takes time, it takes investment, and you have to really learn how to listen. So I think that's very broad-based, but I think that's been the most helpful thing for me to think about, which is to think about this as a relationship and to think about it as something that requires time investment and nurturing and listening. And then the other side of that is, just like when you're writing a grant, you should think about what the review criteria are, because you're not funding your own research. When you want to engage in school-based research, there's a great deal of compromise that you may have to think about in terms of what it is that you want to do, because you, in a partnership, need to think about how that work is going to serve the community that you're engaged with as well. So it's not just like you're trying to write to a reviewer to fund your work. When you're starting partnerships, you need to think about what it is that is the need of the school or the district that you're working with, and how it is that your work can serve them and what it is that they need as well. So that.
I'll jump in there because I think the thoughts I jotted down are well connected to yours, Gwen, and I've no doubt they'll be connected to Corey's as well. You know, you started out by saying it's not that easy, it's hard. And one of the things I would highly recommend for people who are planning to get into school-based research or are in it now and trying to help it thrive is to take a good look at what a number of researchers and experts have identified as barriers to school-based research. And Gwen, you hit on some of the biggest ones. There's this need for true collaboration. I've been part of formal school-university collaborations, one in Tennessee with Kathleen Lane, who initially built the partnership, and I expanded it into writing. And that made such a difference in getting anything done. But those kinds of relationships, those formal school-university relationships, are very hard to form. And I want to hit just quickly some of the barriers. We can come back to more barriers later. But I highly recommend Brian Cook's chapter in it was 2012, the last APA handbook in volume 1. He goes over evidence-based practices, and a whole section of the chapter is devoted to barriers. I did a paper for Policy Journal, devoted a section to barriers. Deborah McCowan recently wrote a very good paper with her colleagues in Reading and Writing 2018. And she talked about what happens to an evidence-based practice, as in their study, when fidelity is compromised. And one of the major barriers that we find is teacher buy-in. And so Gwen already hit on this, but teachers are resistant to change. Schools as an entity tend to be resistant to change. And so developing those relationships really matters. And I just want to hit a couple things there. First, we have to be in tune with the realities of today's classrooms, districts, state mandates. We have to understand what teachers can and cannot do on their own. The notion of a classroom where teachers closed the door and pretty much did what they wanted is just wrong. It's totally out of date now. Teachers are on pacing calendars, they're on required curriculum. They have times when they must prepare for test taking. Whether we think these things are good or bad, we can't just go in with, you know, all these things are wrong and we need to fix them and you need to listen to me. I mean, obviously all of the people in this audience know that. When I asked last year at a panel on working in schools, how many of the people in that room were doing school-based work right now, I was so excited. I mean, I've never seen that many hands come up. So we are moving more and more into that school-based research. There is also a distrust of evidence-based practices that is very evident in schools. And not long ago, a colleague in schools sent me a tweet where a leadership person in that district tweeted, "Beware EBPs." And many teachers in that particular district prefer what they call faith-based teaching. In other words, you have faith in it and it's worked for you. And I understand that. And this is a huge issue that we need to deal with as researchers. We need to know what is already working for teachers, how we can integrate what we bring into what's working for them. And maybe we have something that will work better, but we need to be very collaborative and establish relationships in introducing why would you make this change. Two real quick things and I'll stop. I mean, there's definitely more, but you really need local teachers who work with you first, who've seen what you are trying to do, who you've been in their classrooms and it's made a difference. Researcher after researcher after researcher, and in multiple points, have found that, multiple pubs have found that having a teacher champion, someone in the schools who's worked with you, done what you're, like in our case, it's SRSD. Most often schools come to get involved in SRSD at a larger basis with most teachers or many teachers, or required across teachers, is because of these teachers who are already on board, who've already done it. And research shows that narrative from current teachers is one of the most persuasive factors in getting teachers and other school people on your side. And the second thing is resources, understanding resources, time, commitment. When we want to do SRSD in schools, we start our negotiations for time with district level management or leadership, curriculum directors, and principals. They have to give teachers the time to do this. We show them the outcomes they can expect if they give teachers the time. But that means that those principals have to agree to lifting the pacing calendar, right? And they have to agree to lifting current curriculum. That is not easy. I will stop there. There's more, and I'm sure it will all come up.
Well, thanks, Gwen and Karen. Great points, and you hit everything I wanted to say, basically. Except I do want to say just two practical tips. I'll make them quick. And this relates to the stuff that they've already said. But get teachers on your research team and get them on your research team from the start. That means that they help you develop your proposals. They help you develop your research plans, and they help you develop your research questions. The second thing that's a practical tip is just be prepared for the toughest thing you'll do in classroom-based research will be getting district research approval. That's just it is a hard thing to do. It takes the most of our time, and get people on your team or do it yourself. Just get good at getting district research approval, and it's different in every venue, every location. Small districts, large districts, sometimes they can be easy, sometimes they can be way harder than anything you've ever gone through in IRB at a university. So just be prepared for that.
Thanks so much. I think we started moving into the next two questions. And so I also wanted to give a chance for Alex and Corey to hop in as well. And of course, all panelists to chime in. But the next two questions were, how do you build meaningful university K-12 relationships? And also, how can university K-12 partnerships be mutually beneficial for all stakeholders? And I think we've started touching on those, but Corey and Alex, please feel free to chime in, and I will also stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, Corey, I'm happy to chime in. I was just reading Corey's chat, and I think my thought's pretty similar, and it's this idea that you have to develop trust with your teachers. And so to get that teacher champion and that teacher partner, very first, you have to establish a good foundation of trust, and that takes a lot of time. And so I think that's a common theme that even came up earlier today in the motivation theory session, which is this idea that we need to slow down. And so working with schools and teachers aren't necessarily going to align with, pressures that we have in academia, dissertation schedules, whatever, at the faculty level, what that might look like. And so to just know that it's going to take some time to build that trust and to slow down. And I think another, thing that could be really useful is to approach your potential partner with just an excitement and curiosity to learn from them. And so to really think about repositioning ourselves, not as being experts jumping into a school to tell them what should be done, but to position the teachers and the people in the school as the experts. They are the experts of what's happening in their school, what's happening in their classroom, what's happening with their students. And so we need to approach, I think, these partnerships with that angle of, I want to learn from you. I want to learn from you as the expert in your classroom about what your needs are, what's working really well, what other people can learn from that's already happening. And I think it's really important to get a sense too of what's their history with researchers. So you're not the first person maybe who's shown up at that school trying to do research. And so what does that history look like? And it could look like, that they felt like they were being judged harshly, and that could be a potential barrier to the partnership. And so I think, that's, I think, one way to build trust is to really think about yourself not as the expert, but as the teacher being the expert. And then I think too, just have fun and be authentic and be excited. And I think that's really important, is to kind of like, I was thinking of the movie The Shining, like all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And it's the same thing with research partnerships. You don't want to do all work and no play. The play piece is really important to making a happy relationship last.
No, I think it's been pretty well said. I mean, I just actually probably the best thing that I could do is just relate the conversations I literally had today. I was talking to OSU and student teacher placements, and I just kind of said, I need to say this out loud. I know you believe this, but like, you guys have to train your future teachers, and we want to be part of that. But make no mistake, the focus is our students. Every kid is, every kid means something. So I think researchers get a lot further when, as Alex has said, they come to the teachers and say, well, you're the experts on your school, on your teachers, on your families, and let's focus on that. While at the same time, having this long-term view of, where Karen was talking about how do you lead people to other places, so this is no different, than if you're working with a student or you're working with someone and you're trying to say, I want to honor and understand where you are now. And I also want to try to lead you to a better place. And you have to create some short-term, things that help you get to a longer-term place. So, as someone, again, proudly getting my behavioral science degree at the University of Maryland, I mean, this is just basic. How do you treat people? And to me, it's the same. I want to be treated by a university member same way I think my students want me to treat them. So I think just university partners, be real explicit. The focus is on students, and we begin with the ones we have now. And the people, how I even arrived at this conference was a group at Ohio State, and we had already been working with them, but when the pandemic hit, they said, what can we do for you right now? And they did a fabulous job of, of creating these surveys, and we were getting information on the well-being of students now, so I could help students now. I mean, I have love for my future abstract students, but the ones I really cherish are the ones that, like, I'm in charge of their well-being and education right now. So I think that's the best way to get to connect with teachers in schools.
I want to quickly endorse what Doug said about district level being so difficult. And, having been doing this for like 40 years now, and today's my birthday, I should actually double check.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. But one of the very first things we did in Tennessee, when we were at Maryland for 23 years, and the very first thing we did in Tennessee and the very first thing we did in Arizona was go and meet with curriculum superintendents, special ed and general ed, since our work crosses those borders, and find out what we could do for them. What are their needs? This whole notion of use-inspired research. In Maryland, they needed someone in special ed. I mean, we're going back to the 70s and 80s, early 80s. They needed someone in special ed to teach students how LD could and couldn't be, teach teachers how LD could and couldn't be identified. They were way off base with identification. We did every single school and school system in the state, a team of 4 of us from the university. And, after that, when I would go to them and say, look, I would like to work with just a couple of teachers and try out this way of improving writing, the door was mostly open. And within a decade, and I know a decade's a long time, but I just had to make one phone call and talk to the current curriculum superintendent, and I was in. And they changed over time, so I had to keep reestablishing that. In Tennessee, I got to step right into a school university collaborative. That was an incredible bridge. And it's been really trying. I just want to say it's not easy for anybody. It's been really difficult in Arizona. The local district has been closed to research because of bad behavior by researchers. The districts around us are overwhelmed with requests. And so I will just, the one last thing I will add, and I will be quiet, is be willing to go further away. Your closest schools are the most likely to be inundated. And if you're writing for a grant, put in the travel money. If you don't have a grant, which most of our research has not been funded. In the last few years, we've been very fortunate. But do the travel, go further away, work in the schools who are desperate to get help and don't have a university or a teacher prep program next door. So that's all I want. I just wanted to add that about the district level.
And I'd like to build off that a little bit, Karen, and thinking about it as, you know, you're working this work you want to do with these partnerships is falling within a nested system, right? So you may have so it's important, that you don't try to do this alone, that you establish a team of graduate students and also other faculty or researchers, as well as teachers, as well as coordinators. But so it's sometimes it can be really hard to understand the local context of where you want to work. And that local context has lots of layers. It's at the district level, if it's a formal relationship, are you going to need a memorandum of understanding, and who can help you with that? And what are the expectations at your university as well as the district, and how that works? And every district will be different. So I've spent most of my career working with the fifth largest district in the country. They have legal teams that have to review these MOUs with our legal team. That's a lot different than maybe a less formal MOU with a smaller district someplace. And then working within that, we have a lot of political turnover with our districts. And so a partnership and an understanding that you had a year ago might not be the same a year later when you go to try to renew that partnership, or you need to go at the higher levels. Everything's going along swimmingly with the schools you're working with, and then something changes at the level of the district office or even the leadership of the district. So the context and the local context, and understanding that not just on the research level, but on the political and practice level, will make your job easier. And then also understanding that every school is different and every classroom is different, and there's a local context within each one of those. So you kind of have to be able to understand that all of those different layers have different needs and different desires. And the most important ones are the people you're going to be working with every day. But so for example, if I am going into a classroom and a teacher says, hey, we hardly ever get researchers or faculty in here, could you just spend 15 minutes answering questions about kids? And I answer questions, everything from like, what do you wear to work, to like, what is it that you do? What is educational psychology? I mean, so there's a whole range, and just sitting there and spending time. But it's, as someone mentioned earlier, it is important to realize that what may be okay in one space or one classroom may be perceived as a threat in another, or that the district may want to make sure that you can only publish certain types of data because something that's been published before about their district has been perceived as negative. So the tensions that exist within that system need to be carefully navigated, and the people that you're working with every day are going to be your best guides, but they also might not be knowledgeable about those higher and different levels that may impact the work that you're all trying to do together.
Yeah, thanks, Gwen. I also want to actually bring up a question that came up in the chat box, and there was a couple responses, but one of the questions that came up for the panel is, when you are looking for partnerships, have any of you collaborated with colleagues throughout your college? Do you have any college level support? Assuming colleges you all work in are colleges of education. And I think a follow-up comment was that sometimes she's found it difficult to find allies in teacher preparation departments and not sure how to think about that.
Well, okay. Since I've been both teacher prep and ed psych at the same time, you know, interestingly enough, even if you are in teacher prep, which I've led for decades, I've, it's been a big part of my life into the last few years when ASU put me into a doc prep thing. And I miss teacher prep so much, but most of my colleagues have come from all over the place and not necessarily the College of Education. And within the colleges of education, there are some teams. And so there's already some advice in the chat that I think is really good. Get to know who's doing what is really, really important. And how do you know their work? Just cold calling on someone and seeing if they might be interested, and you don't know what they've written, you don't know their history. So if you really want to try and develop those relationships, it's very, very important to get to know the work, to have a purpose and a reason that you and that person should connect. Now, a lot of my connections right now, my teams are not local colleagues. There are very few people doing writing in my college. I mean, it's really me and Steve. There's one or two other people who are interested, but they're going in other directions. We wouldn't be a natural fit together. So I look broadly. I wrote a grant with someone I had never met, but whose work I was following, Lindsay Matsumura. She's now an associate dean, but still a researcher and actively submitting grants. And that grant didn't get funded, largely because it never got out of triage, because there was always one comment the couple years we submitted it, that no one on this grant knows anything about writing. Well, that's a whole nother story, but we're supposed to be smile now and that's kind of funny, I think. So anyways, it created a long-lasting set of interactions and collegial activities, even though the grant didn't get funded. I was approached by Kay Widjakumar, who I know Steve mentioned in his Thorndike, years and years ago, to do one thing together, and that has blossomed into a decade of grants and research, all in directions that we both wanted to go. So, one of the things I tell our early career faculty, I mean, they're always very concerned about, I don't have mentors, I don't know how to find mentors, I don't know how to network. Well, it's like we teach younger children, they have to take control of that. They have to self-advocate. And so that would be my bit. If you can find someone right there, I mean, that's awesome and that's wonderful, but you probably are going to need to look even broader. And today, it's much easier to work with people across the distance than it has been in the past. That's just.
Actually, that's a great segue into the next question we had, and a question that came up from Tim in the chat. Any recommendations for developing relationships with local districts in this new COVID virtual world? I'm sure with most schools going virtual, so to the point you were making, Karen, about maybe collaboration with folks further away being potentially more feasible. Schools going virtual or limiting visitors to school will make it difficult to get into schools. And a related question we had for the panel was around how you are pivoting or planning your current and future work in the midst of this pandemic.
I can kind of summarize two comments I made, into one, going back, just saying, if you're going to do anything with schools, don't make them an afterthought. Sometimes I have people who, because Metro is literally on campus, I have people like, oh, I got to the part of the outreach of my NSF grant. Oh, I need to connect with the school. I've done, and they come to me and we're such an afterthought, and we don't want to be an afterthought. So, for anyone who wants to develop, something with schools, you got to make sure the work is that the school and the students and the community is part of the DNA of the research. The other thing in terms of connecting with schools right now, actually we can all sit here and talk about the disadvantages of being in a COVID environment, but you got to find the advantages, very Sun Tzu art of war, find, yes, there are a lot of things that make it harder, but then again, now distance is not a problem. Now distance between a university and a district is not a problem. So think about what expertise, think about what help you could offer a school, right now. And there is a tremendous amount of help that college, university can provide. So actually, I think the virtual environment, cuts out a lot of the natural distance that would be an impediment for a school district. I think, maybe Karen mentioned that, try to get out beyond just your immediate vicinity.
Yeah, so I'll just expand on that a little bit, Corey, or just talk about maybe something a little bit different. So COVID has hit my project heavy because we spend all of our time in classrooms and we collect data in the classroom setting, observations, video, audio, all the artifacts that the students generate, and this is hundreds of students. So we've been hit pretty hard, and we are pivoting. We're trying to develop a environment that's going to let us do what we do in kind of this mode of teaching online. And so we've got some bringing expertise to help us to do that. And it's for all those people that do this kind of research in educational technology, you'll probably be laughing at me a little bit, but what I'm learning is just that it's so much more than just developing a computer software program. So we're bringing in the appropriate expertise to help us formulate this. And I will say one thing though that's really been a benefit for us. We had an infrastructure set up because we operate in so many locations across the country, and we have researchers across the country, that we had a virtual data sharing infrastructure set up through New York University's Databrary system. So if you can get on Databrary and your university has a relationship with Databrary, it's a secure environment. It can be also a public environment, but you can make it a secure environment for any kind of data artifact, any sort of file that can be made electronic. So we're continuing to do analysis with the data that we have, and we're hoping to collect more, and we're in constant communication with our teachers, just so you know. But it's huge. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of an NSF funded grant at multiple locations across the country, and we had the same exact issue. We were supposed to be collecting data and rolling out a big part of our project this fall, and we are switching and pivoting year 2 and year 3. But I also think, to some extent, along the same lines, it's giving us some opportunities. And Corey, I think this is something that you mentioned. A lot of times school-based research, especially if it's funded, you feel a lot of pressure to be on a timeline that allows it to move forward and meet needs. But at the same time, you sometimes need more time. And so we are pivoting our research to think about things that we were going to do later, which was moving some materials online. We're now doing a little bit sooner. We're also we've recognized that there's a need for more of a coaching guide. We're able to spend some more time reviewing our materials in light of some of the anti-racism and some of the racial oppression that's really and disciplinary issues especially that have come up in a lot of our schools. We're able to really spend a little more time looking at our materials and being more thoughtful in those in a way that, and working with our teachers, because we have a co-design project. So working with our teachers as co-designers to think about how we might better integrate and be more responsive. This came up in the motivation panel this morning. But I think you have to, comes down to what you're saying, Doug. You have to be flexible. You have to be like, okay, so if this isn't working with COVID and we're going to have to put some stuff online and we're going to have to wait, and hopefully things will be better next year and we can get back into classrooms, what can we do online? How can we support our teachers? How can we learn a little bit about the way that the practices and the research we want to do and the constructs we're interested in, how those might be understood differently in different modalities, which is something we weren't necessarily going to focus on. So I I think you have to think about it as an opportunity and really leverage those classroom relationships to find out what you can do to help that might not be related to your research, but also that you can learn from to reinvest as time goes on. Yeah, big pivots.
Thanks, Gwen. And I also encourage folks to take a look at some of the advice that our panelists are putting in the chat box as well around some of these questions. Panelists have spoken, you have all spoken a lot about really leveraging on your relationships with teachers and identifying and putting a lot of value in their expertise. Another question we had for the panelists was also how to leverage your graduate students' prior experiences and expertise. So the question was specifically, how can graduate programs support students who previously worked in education, particularly in K-12 settings, bridge their prior relationships with practitioners to newly formed relationships and enculturation in academia?
Doug, go
Well,
first.
go
Yeah.
ahead,
Oh,
Karen.
no, I was saying, Doug, go.
Well, I just, I first of all, I just want to attribute my knowledge of this transition from a classroom teacher working for a district to a researcher to Gail Sinatra. She is like the expert in how to do this, and she really helped me formulate that transition. And so, in large part, what I do is in that regard. So, what I try to do with, and a lot of the students that come work with me, the doctoral students that come work with me, or postdocs, have had classroom-based experience, have been teachers in the classroom. And it is a little bit different. So there is a little bit of an acclimatation process. So it takes time, it takes a bit of adjustment. But I also encourage them to keep their networks open, keep publishing in their, through the teacher practitioner journals that they're familiar with, that they've used as teachers, or they may have published in prior to, because they provide a little different insight now, they provide a little different perspective. And so it's kind of this transitional process, but to keep their experiences as a teacher really salient and their classroom experience salient is really important.
Yeah, I'm in a little bit of a different position, but maybe there's some insights from there, because I am in teacher prep, and because up until the last few years, that has been, as I'm as immersed in that as I have been in my research, I have only advised students who have taught, because to get a job in teaching, you have to have taught a minimum of 3 years. And I taught several years. So one of the things that I think is really important is that I asked recently also at APA to a large group, how many of you have taught? And I saw more hands than ever. And I really think more and more, it's how can we get former teachers onto our teams? How do we get them to go to grad school? How do we avoid the undergraduate, master's, PhD time frame and you're in? I think that we need better relationships to recruit the best MA students. I always had an inside line on that. But if colleagues from EdPsych had asked me, I could have told them who were the ones to really go after. So it would be really good to develop that. But use that expertise they have in schools. And Doug covered that well. I think that one of the hard things for people who haven't taught, and that they can really use students to help them with, is establishing relationships with schools. Within the first 3 minutes you are in any school leadership person's office, they will be digging to find out if you've taught. It is without fail. If you haven't, you should be frank, but you should also be frank about what you've done. That isn't, maybe you weren't a K-12 teacher, but this is how embedded you are. And maybe you should have a couple members of your team with you who have taught. I never go alone. A lot of times it's the doc student who's closest to designing their dissertation, or who's going to be my project director for an unfunded huge thing we're trying to do. So I wanted to add sort of a different perspective to this question. And the other thing is, if you could get someone on your team who understands single case design, because my thing has always been teaching my doc students to start small, right? And you can get a publishable study in a high quality journal in single case design in a year. And it can be instruction based, intervention based, you know, whatever you're looking at. And that small beginning with that one teacher, that's what we talked about before, right? And now you've got your people in classrooms with the teacher who know how to behave on your team and how to be. Most of my students haven't needed much instruction on that. They've been teachers, they know how to be team members. And so anyways, I just wanted to add those thoughts. I know that, you know, we have 2 studies. I put it in chat. We'll have no post data. They're gone. The studies are gone. But we've learned a lot. We'll put it into what comes next, right? The thing with a single case design, especially if you're an early career researcher or a design study, those are good too. And we've seen a lot of great literature on design studies lately. But crap, if you're gonna do a design study, why not do single case design with it so you have a empirical outcome? Really, single case design studies are design studies. Anyways, you usually don't get into this trouble. Even with COVID, we would have been able to finish if we'd had one going. We probably would have been out of there before it hit hard. So I just want to plug that as something that as a field, we aren't, you know, I've written about this before, and I know I've beat this drum a lot, and I beat it a lot when I was president of Division 15, but we need to think about expanding into these methodologies that allow smaller starts. So I'll stop there.
The other thing about graduate students, which I think is really important, is, and this gets to thinking about the different types of diversity that we add to our teams when we're doing school-based research. So you know, there's a challenge in thinking about how do we have students who were working in schools and, you know, they come to the university, and I think a lot of times there's a crisis of expertise, right? So who am I now? I don't know all this stuff. It's like, no, but you know so much that you can bring. And that's not just students that come from, that's not just students that are coming as classroom teachers, but all previous experience that they've had. So taking the time to learn about what our graduate students are, what they know, what they want to know, where they want to go. And then also, you know, I mean, one of the issues that I've had is our school district is extremely diverse, and I don't pretend that I can understand or know all of the challenges that our students are facing that have a different life experiences and backgrounds that I have. And so when I have students, I'm always looking for students that can help make connections and help make sure that our team is robust in terms of both lived experiences as well as culture, race, gender, ethnicity, so that when we are going into schools and we're talking to kids or we're working with teachers, we are not going in as a homogenous group with a homogenous set of expectations. And I think that's really critical, especially if you're working with diverse schools and diverse districts. And most of the time that comes from your grad students and your postdocs. That's not coming from your researchers, the primary researchers, academic.
Thank you so much, everybody. I think we are coming to the end of the session in terms of our schedule, but we did have a couple folks ask for like, what is your one advice? Actually, it was top 3, but in the chat I put, if you had to give one takeaway to our audience members about where to start as an early career researcher, if you want to embark on this partnership, what would that kind of nugget of advice be? So if our panelists don't mind throwing that in the chat. And I would just like to thank our panelists so much, and everybody who's here. Unfortunately, we can't see your faces, so the only way we know if you're here is if you posted something in the chat box. But thanks for joining us on a Friday evening. And this was a wonderful discussion. A plug that DeLeon and I wanted to make on behalf of the committee is that we are launching a series this upcoming fall called, Leon, what is it called? I don't have it up on my screen. I can pull it up.
Yes, so the title will remain a mystery for now, but what we're doing is we want to focus on different assumptions in educational psychology, and we want to be able to question those assumptions. And so we're providing space for that for scholars, all scholars, but especially early career scholars. I've also added a link in the chat. So if you're on GroupMe, there's a pretty sizable group of scholars who have joined this group. It's called the Community Engaged Educational Psychology Scholars. And so we text, we share information, share resources out, and report out. And so two of our SEEP members, Karen and Al, are currently on this panel. But just come in there and join the conversation and just continue this. So it doesn't have to be once a year. It can just be more fluid. And yeah, so join. Here's the link. Well, Christine, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It was great to see you all, and have a great evening and weekend.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, DeLeon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. Happy APA.